You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The time has come for America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our communities.
One day longer, one day stronger. One day longer, one day stronger.
Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Good morning, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, David Story. It is Saturday, August 1st, 2020, and we're broadcasting live online and on the radio on WVNN in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area from Athens, Alabama. A recording of this program will play tomorrow, Sunday, August 2nd, 2020, on the great WGOL in Russelville, Alabama. Today we've got a really exciting interview. Dr. Jake Grumbach from the University of Washington is going to be talking to us about his study that attempts to prove that union membership decreases racial resentment among members. We'll also be talking about the witch doctor that everyone is trusting over the entire medical establishment on coronavirus information, and corporate America's complete disregard for the life of workers in chicken plants, and taking your calls. All this and more on today's Valley Labor Report. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We appreciate your time. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week, get our quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL, Unionist. And if you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, you can search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments and release them throughout the week. And we also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps, so you can see if we're on your listening platform of choice. You can go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. And finally, if you appreciate our work and want to keep us on the air, consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/the Labor Report. So like I said, this is an interview that I'm incredibly excited about. I think it intersects really nicely with the purpose of this show and the national conversation about racism that was spurred by the murder of George Floyd in late May. Of course, due to the circumstances of his death, a lot of the conversation around has centered around the obvious racism in policing and the criminal justice system. But of course, racism exists elsewhere too, and it raises the obvious question about how to work to combat that in a lot of different scenarios. Rarely talked about in the popular discourse, unfortunately, is the role that labor unions can play, have played, and ought to play in combating racism both systemically and interpersonally. Dr. Jake Grumbach, a researcher at the University of Washington, along with his colleague Paul Freimer from Princeton, hope to not only discuss these things but prove what the effects of unions has been on racial resentment of members quantitatively. I think this is incredibly important work, and Jake, I appreciate you taking your time to talk to us about this today.
Absolutely. Great to be on with you guys.
Thank you. So the fact that union membership decreasing interpersonal racism among members, the fact that it decreases racial resentment, this is a phenomenon that really any organizer worth their salt could tell you that because they've experienced it firsthand. And it makes intuitive sense, when you're because membership in a union necessitates having very hard and intimate conversations about things like pay, health care, whether to go on strike or not, and having these conversations often. So it makes sense that this increased personal exposure would decrease racial resentment, but you've gone a step further and attempted to put this phenomenon in hard numbers. Before we get too far into the broader conversation about racism and labor unions, I'd like to dig in a little bit on your study. So could you tell us how you're defining racial resentment, how you're finding the degree to which folks have this racial resentment, and how you're measuring the effect that union membership plays on this?
That sounds great. I think that was a great summary of the sort of issues at hand in the paper. So racial resentment is a way in surveys that social scientists use to try to detect racism in the public. And it's really actually hard to find racism in the public in surveys because of what's called social desirability bias. And you can understand this, that when somebody calls you on the phone and asks you various questions, if they're asking you questions about, do you believe black people are innately inferior to white people? Not many people are going to answer that. Even the ones that believe that are not going to answer it truthfully because it's embarrassing. So racial resentment as a measure is another way that essentially asks questions whether people believe racial inequality is based on institutional racism, long-term racism, the legacy of slavery and segregation and beyond, or it's due to sort of personal defects, laziness among black people and people of color. So that's there's a big debate actually in psychology, political science, and sociology, other disciplines about how to measure racism, but that's one main popular way. And then what we find, we do a lot of work statistically to try to show what, like you said, what labor organizers have known for a long time, and really also what historians and other qualitative scholars have known for a long time, which is that unions have played a big role in producing a sort of interracial, solidarity-based labor movement. And we try to show this statistically, and it's really important when you do this statistically to try to show that it's actually labor unions making people less racist rather than other characteristics of them that are just happen to be related to labor unions, that it's actually the labor union membership doing it. So we put in a lot of work to do that.
Right. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that work, because I think that there are some variables that people can think of that would make union members different than non-union members. For example, geography. There are more union members in New York and California, let's say, than in Alabama. We can also think about private sector versus public sector. Public sector workers tend to be more unionized than private sector workers, and the public sector also has a larger degree. To my knowledge, there are more people of color working in the public sector. So, how do you get those confounding variables out in your study?
Yeah, you should come be a professor in my department. That you're asking exactly the right questions. So the point here is that I think the point's about geography. So there are more union members in places where we'd maybe expect less racial resentment. Industries like teaching are more unionized, and people that become teachers tend to be, interested in these sort of anti-racism issues more than the average person. But what we do is we use what's called panel data, where you look across time at the same people. So you have them before, you can ask them questions before they were labor union members, and then after, once they become labor union members, and see the change. And that protects statistically against what you're suggesting, like confounders. So not only do we do things like statistically control for geography and for income and things like that, but we look at this panel data to try to see across time whether becoming a union member changes you. And that's a lot more effective than trying to compare otherwise similar people who are and are not labor union members.
Right. And
then we did a lot of work to establish that it wasn't other stories. So labor unions provide people better job security, and labor union members get paid higher wages than non-labor union members. It could just be, that people feel a little more economically comfortable when they have a solid middle-class union job than a more precarious job otherwise. But we show that it's not the income that's doing this. It's actually being a labor union member and being part of a labor union.
Right, and you mentioned that you use this panel data that looks at people over time, and not only does that remove the confounding variables of geography, public sector versus private sector, but that also works to decrease the amount of what you called social desirability bias, that, you know, a person is not going to tell you, right, that oh yeah, I hate black people, right? No one's going to say that in a study, but
right.
like it, you know, you can measure like the social desirability bias is going to be the same before and
right.
after a person joins the union, right? Like, say the social desirability bias is like +1. I am like +1, not a racist, right? To whatever
right.
the base, whatever you actually are, you add +1 to your not racist score, right? Well, if you
That's
have
exactly
an
right.
original not racist score of 2, and then when you join the union, you have a not racist score of 3 or 4, then the delta is going to be the same whether or not you are, you know, are having this social desirability bias. And I think that the data that you have in your study and the work that you've done to reduce these biases and confounding variables is really robust and laudatory.
Thanks. So that's exact. Like these days in the social sciences and the quantitative social sciences, like, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the politics of higher education in the U.S., whether professors are too liberal or whatnot. But there are such strict rules and sort of thresholds you have to reach to demonstrate a statistical finding that's real. They really, you know, when you put a paper into a scientific journal and get it through peer review, they are looking for any potential reason you're actually wrong. So you have to build these really, really robust demonstrations that you found something. It's a little overboard, actually, but it does show once you get this through that what you found statistically is real.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, you know, a lot of people, like you said, they talk about how, you know, social science professors are very liberal, they're very loose with their studies, and they just say what they want to say. And I think that hearing from you about the things that you're doing to reduce the amount of personal bias that's going in from you and reducing the amount of confounding variables that are just found naturally in the world, I think that may help people kind of understand the amount of work that actually goes into stuff like this, because there's real serious work and it takes a lot of time to do this kind of stuff.
Exactly. No, way too much time. No, it's actually
how long did this study take you to do?
So we wrote it over maybe 6 months, the first real package of it, and then you send it to a journal. This was actually like remarkably fast from my experience, and then it came back through peer review. In another 3 months, you get reviews that say you need to change these, and we're not convinced on these things. So one reviewer actually asked about right-to-work states and non-right-to-work states and thought that actually, you know, the effect of union membership might be different in non-right-to-work states where people, you know, are more have more ways to just not avoid joining unions sometimes. And but actually, then we did additional analysis.
Right, yeah, we're going to talk about that on the other side. Stay tuned.
Now listen, lonely tumor inside my head. Let's go! Hey! Walking through a wasteland, undarkened skies, in a land built upon a foundation of lies, pointed up structures and discerned factories.
Good morning and welcome back, folks. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we have Professor Jake Grumbach from the University of Washington. He's talking to us about his study that has that has attempted to show quantitatively the effect on racial resentment that labor unions have on their members. And so when we left off, you were talking about right-to-work states versus non-right-to-work states. So I just want to let you kind of flesh out that thought.
Yeah, just basically in the social science peer review process, they make you demonstrate that it could not possibly be any other reason for why you're finding the statistics you're finding. One could have been right-to-work states. One could have been we have too many professionals, like teachers and nurses unions in our sample, things like that. We did extra work in the appendices to demonstrate that was not the case, and really we're finding that labor unions make workers less racially resentful, less racist, more interested in interracial solidarity for sort of working-class politics. Right.
So when we talked earlier, kind of doing the debrief before the interview, you mentioned that this study is very temporally bound, right? This is not your results are not going to be true throughout all of history. And in fact, for people that know much at all about labor history, they know that labor unions, especially the American Federation of Labor, at the turn of the 20th century, was a very racist organization. They had segregated unions, white-only unions, black-only unions. They fought very hard for restrictionist immigration policies. They were very demeaning to immigrants and immigrant labor, and so. But then there came a change in the labor movement with the CIO and other more interracial solidarity movements like the CIO, like the IWW stuff in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So can you talk about kind of the role that the labor movement has played in racial politics throughout the 20th and 21st century and how it's changed?
Yeah, that's exactly right. From the AFL, which was a sort of artisanal craft union where they really fought hard for the Chinese Exclusion Act and were an all-white union. But that changed, and by the 20s and 30s, some majority-white unions like the CIO and the IWW were actually really pushing for civil rights to go hand-in-hand with labor politics. And they started articulating something that sort of theory that goes back to at least W.E.B. Du Bois in the early 20th century, but the idea that racism is a tool of the ruling class to divide workers and the working class and prevent solidarity and working class power to get their due. So by the 20s and 30s, the IWW and CIO were really pushing in that direction, and then this became a huge phenomenon in the UAW in the 1950s and 60s under Walter Reuther. And you can see Walter Reuther marching in the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, Martin Luther King's March on Washington. You can see him walking in the front with fellow sort of union leaders like A. Philip Randolph of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, a black union. And that was when they knew at the time it was very clear that the labor movement was going to be a part of the civil rights movement. And they knew that, again, racism is dividing working class people all the way to now where the AFL-CIO is very clearly has anti-racist messaging. The leaders make speeches against racism in politics and elsewhere and say, keep your eyes on the prize. We need working class solidarity when we're divided by race or gender or sexual orientation or really any of these sort of identity or cultural dimensions. That is a tool of the powerful of the ruling class to divide us.
Right. What do you think it was? What do you think it was that made union leaders and the rank and file in the 20s and 30s when this started becoming more apparent? What do you think it was that what was the light bulb moment, right? Because for so long, unions had, like we said, unions had played into this racial division, native versus immigrant worker division. And so what was the light bulb moment that made them see that, oh, this is like not in our interests to like not like immigrant workers or not like black workers. This is not in our interest. It will be more in our interest if we all work together. What was that light bulb moment?
Yeah, I think there's two potential explanations in union leaders' minds. One's the more sort of strategic, cynical answer, which is still cool, which is that they saw, okay, there's an increased number of black industrial workers coming to, for example, northern cities in the Great Migration by the 1930s, and the Depression was on, and to keep labor unions powerful and expand their power, they would try to create interracial labor unions to expand their memberships. That's one reason. Another is this more just principle-based reason that you see very clearly that divisions based on race are going to hurt class politics and really just economic justice for people in the U.S., period.
Right. And you also mentioned when we were talking earlier about the role that that the labor movement and organized labor has played in partisan politics. And you mentioned during this period, we can call it like a renaissance, or it wasn't like a renewing necessarily, but like this really powerful interracial solidarity movement within organized labor, within the House of Labor, that really brought people together. And in the 50s and 60s, we had nearly 30-something% of workers unionized, and so there was this very strong class politics, and that has kind of been switched for something else. Can you tell us what that was and how that switch happened in the partisan political landscape?
So since the 1970s, labor union density, labor union membership has declined, massively. And this was intentional, right, by, politicians and corporate forces really didn't want workers to be organized, and they got major businesses got really involved in politics by the late 70s and onwards. They helped to crush labor unions, for example, in the 1980s. As labor unions were diminishing, then this labor power was less evident in politics. And what replaced it was strategic on the part of some of these politicians who wanted people to not focus on labor issues, not threaten their corporate power to get paid higher wages and have better health care and job security. They wanted people to focus on cultural resentment issues and identity resentment issues. So after the 1980s, we saw the increase of this sort of cultural backlash politics, for example, and we see that now. So it's clear statistically, again, if you're in political science and you do these statistics, you can tell more about how somebody's going to vote based on how they feel about Colin Kaepernick than you can based on how they feel about health care and the minimum wage and class policies, economic policies like that. We're in a moment where politics is overwhelmingly cultural and about cultural resentment, that we really dislike certain people we see on TV, and we hope we can elect people that, talk trash on those people who we dislike on TV. And that has replaced sort of solidarity-based labor politics to the detriment of working-class people. And since the 70s, we've seen a huge rise of it. We've seen the middle class stagnate, where there's been no new wealth for the middle class, and yet the sort of billionaire class has swollen its wealth, many times since over the past generation. And that's not an accident. That was part of destroying the labor movement.
Right. I think that people don't really recognize the extent to which both of the major parties really, really do this. They want to talk about these cultural issues rather than talking about the bread and butter issues about health care, wages, retirements, pensions, because it's so much easier to paint Black Lives Matter on a street than it is to actually reform the police department. It's so much easier for Trump to say, that Kaepernick is an SOB than it is for him to do anything at all materially for his base. And so that's a really important thing to realize when we're talking about these types of cultural versus class politics. We're going to do one more segment with Jake. This is the Valley Labor Report. Stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we've got Professor Jake Grumbach from the University of Washington. He recently authored a study in the American Journal of Political Science. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, talking about the effects of union membership on racial resentment among members, and so we've been talking to him about that. It's very, very. The study is very robust. If you missed the first parts of the interview, you can go back and watch it on YouTube. We'll have it up early next week. And so where we left off, we were talking about how identity politics in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party has kind of replaced a sort of class politics that the labor movement was very active in creating in the middle of the 20th century. And so was there any other thoughts that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. No, I just thought before the break you summarized it really nicely. So there's a couple things to highlight in what you said. One is that so there's sort of two versions of identity politics going on and sort of cultural resentment politics. One is at least the Democratic Party establishment really likes symbolic gestures about anti-racism, anti-homophobia, and sort of anti-misogyny messaging without much material backing to it. So, for example, a policy like Medicare for all or higher minimum wage or stronger labor power for unions, that would help. That would certainly help African Americans and other people of color in the U.S. tremendously, but those don't appear on the agenda as much as some symbolic policies sometimes. On the Republican side, you have, I think Donald Trump encapsulates this best, where the sort of stereotype we have in our head is that his base is the white working class former union member, like a out of work coal miner, whereas his policies in office have been nothing but giving red meat to the billionaire class, massive high-end tax cuts and other things like that. And what he has done strategically really well is cause people to vote based on cultural resentment and a sort of white identity politics rather than look at the policies, look at his attempts to cut health care and wages and transfer a ton of money upward to the billionaire class.
Right. And again, you mentioned in your paper – oh, what were you saying? Yeah,
the decline of labor movements is just key in this.
Right, and you mentioned in your paper that W.E.B. Du Bois called the phenomenon of white workers being pro-slavery, despite the fact that it decreased their free labor, the white workers' labor, because they're competing with free labor. And so today we kind of have a psychological wage where people are voting for Trump so that he can make the right people angry rather than actually make their lives materially better. I don't think it's exactly the same. It's a little different, but it's still a psychological wage. No, you're not actually – your life is not getting better. You're just you're just experiencing Schadenfreude because
exactly. You don't get your health care is cut and you lose your job, but at least you own the lib.
Right.
Am I right?
Right. That's exactly right. So, we're talking about this as if it's the implication is that this is bad. It is bad that identity politics has taken over from a class politics that the labor movement helped to invigorate in the middle of the 20th century. And so, as somebody who I don't think you primarily see yourself as like a union activist. I think you primarily see yourself as like a researcher, an academic, somebody like that. But so and I'm assuming you're in the union at the University of Washington, but as somebody who's nominally on the outside, like this isn't like what you think about day in and day out, what would you tell labor leaders to do to reinvigorate that class politics and try to shift the conversation from these cultural, psychological wages to real wages, to real material benefits for working people?
So I do think, to some extent, labor unions are doing the right thing. So we found as evidence sort of some of these solidarity-based trainings that unions do, and some of this has declined. So the AFL-CIO used to have sort of larger organizer and steward trainings than they do now. There's things the labor union can double down on. I love the idea of more small d democratic unions where the rank and file has a greater voice, all of that. But again, I'm not on the ground. I have family history in the labor movement and personally have dabbled in working with unions, but you're right, I'm on the outside, so I'm trying to get this. Basically, what I did was help to statistically demonstrate, I think, what a lot of labor organizers knew, but I'm looking for both you guys and organizers on the ground for insights about sort of the next big push. But I would say for political candidates, really thinking that if you are interested in voting or running for office and things like that, there's a tension often you hear, either focus on anti-racism or focus on class politics like unions. However, that's a false choice that actually, if you think about, it's really the idea of race and class together is the fundamental building blocks of sort of U.S. struggle and politics. And the labor movement combines those to build a robust sort of class politics for everybody and interracial solidarity that can really build a stronger middle class.
That's exactly that's. I completely agree with that. And you mentioned something about more small d democratic unions. And this is something that Jane McAlevey really pushes in her books. And it makes a lot of sense. Making a union more small d democratic, where it's practicable, which is in a lot of areas, is just almost like a silver bullet for so many issues. It's a silver bullet for corruption. If members have more control over their leaders, the leaders are not going to be corrupt. One of the reasons that the UAW was able to become so corrupt at the top is because the people at the top removed a lot of the checks and balances the membership had on them. So if you increase democracy in unions, if you increase the ability of members to have a say over the way that their unions are run, then you obviously decrease corruption, but you're going to help make the unions more of an anti-racist union, because it's not in the interest of the workers to be racist. So that's definitely a really good thing that I think that a lot of good organizers would agree with. We've got a couple of minutes left in the interview, so could you just tell us kind of, you alluded to it a little bit, but tell us what made you want to do this study? What made you want to look into this?
So, I've long been interested in these issues of sort of race and class together. But personally, so my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a newspaper editor for black newspapers like the Michigan Chronicle and then the Chicago Defender in the mid-century. And he was on sort of the labor beat and was really interested in integrating labor unions to become an interracial force for the working and middle class in places like Chicago and Detroit. So that was a powerful influence. Moving forward, just in my childhood, growing up in a city, seeing people without health insurance, seeing just the need for thinking about race and class together, all the way to interning for the union Unite Here, which is a mostly hotel and some restaurant workers unions out on the West Coast. All of those really informed my interest in this, And again, we just do, in political science and social science, we do a tremendous amount of sort of work on people's psychology and how they vote and things like that. There's not enough work quantitatively on the role of labor unions.
Right. Yeah, well, Jake, I appreciate your time today. This has been a really, really interesting, illuminating interview about the way that labor unions affect racial resentment among their members. I think that our audience is really going to enjoy listening to it. And like I said, if you missed part of it, it's going to be on our YouTube channel. You can search YouTube for the Valley Labor Report, and we'll throw this segment up later. Jake, where can folks find you?
People can find me on Twitter at Jake M. Brumback. Or Google me, Jake Brumback, and you can, say hi if you'd like.
All right, Professor, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Stay tuned. This is the Valley Labor Report.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms. Ours are the first generations to feel the effects of climate change and the last to be able to do anything about it. The window to meet this historic challenge is closing. We're already losing our lives and livelihoods. Millions have already been impacted by climate change. We can passively accept this fate, or we can join together and take back our power. If we so choose, our best days are ahead. We have a legacy of coming together to face crises that threaten the very ideals of our nation. From the horrors of slavery to the depths of the Great Depression, from the spread of fascism during World War II to the rise of Jim Crow, we have overcome before, and we have the power to do it again. Let's end the climate crisis by igniting a transformational new era where the government works for the common good. Go to arminarm4climate.org. That's arm in arm, the number 4, climate.org to learn more. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air. If you're looking
It's your news now. WVNN. Depend on it.
There's no escaping the American attraction. A bait and switch that's gonna thrill you with distraction. It sounds so good I can't resist the satisfaction.
Good morning, Tennessee Valley, and welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. You're here with David Story, and I have our illustrious co-host Jacob Morrison on the phone. He's not in with us today, but he has graciously called in to give a small commercial break for Means TV, as well as discuss some of the current topics today. Jacob, you there, brother? Jacob. You there?
Hey, yeah, I couldn't hear any. Were you saying something?
Oh, my apology. Yeah, I probably don't have the microphone cut on. Let's see here. Can you hear me now?
I can hear. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome. Take it away. You got to set it up, we've got a humongous new sponsor to the radio show today, Means TV, and we didn't have time to get them programmed into, or recorded into the program. So you're going to do kind of a impromptu live reading of their So we're really excited to have this new sponsor. And so the Means TV, if you're tired of like boring corporate out-of-touch shows and movies that are being cranked out by like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime, now there is an alternative. Means TV is the world's first worker-owned post-capitalist streaming service.
And so that's right, a worker-owned streaming service with a library of post-capitalist movies, documentaries, series, and weekly original shows covering news, culture, gaming, and more. They have films like The Writer with No Hands, which is a documentary thriller about a screenwriter who disappeared in Los Angeles in the 90s, or Means Morning News, their weekly post-capitalist news show. That new show alone is enough to that's reason enough to check it out, honestly. I watch that every week. They've also got Marxist video game shows, an animated kids show about anarchist cats. They've got some content from your favorite YouTube creators like The Surfs, Richard Wolf. They've got some other content creators on there like the Trillbillies, Abby Martin, Street Fight Radio, and more. And the best part is that it's entirely funded by you. It's entirely funded by listeners, by viewers. There are no advertisers, no venture capital firms ever. For $10 a month, you get access to this huge library of socialist, communist, and anarchist content on Means TV with new movies and shows that are added every week. And if you can't afford that, get this. If you can't afford that, you can send them an email and they'll get you set up at whatever rate you can afford. Like Netflix is not going to do that for you. Netflix is not going to, make sure that you can get their content. They will, if you want to have a subscription to Means TV and you can't afford $10 a month, they want you to be able to see their stuff, and they will get you set up for whatever you can afford. It's an incredible lineup of content, and now more than ever, I think it's vital to support media that reflects and empowers working people. So check out Means TV by going to means.tv on your web browser or download their app on iOS, Android, and Roku. Support entertainment for the 99%. Check out Means today. And when you do, check out with the code Valley Labor for 50% off your first month of Means TV, and to let them know that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report. You'll be supporting Means TV, worker-owned content for the 99%, and you'll be supporting the Valley Labor Report by showing them that we've got an audience that is interested in this kind of content. So check it out. David and I are both subscribers. David has been a subscriber for a very long time. I've been a subscriber for several months now. We both enjoy the content a lot. Check out with the code Valley Labor. You'll get 50% off. If you can't afford $10 a month, let them know, and they'll get you set up for whatever you can afford. Just check it out, folks. It's really, really cool.
It is. I was so excited whenever you sent me a message earlier in the week, because I was actually a supporter of them during their, I think it was Kickstart days, and was sending them money. I remember you telling me about it. Huh?
I remember you telling me about it.
I mean, it's just a great concept that it's viewer funded and worker owned, and they put content on there that the average everyday working class citizen wants to see, and not that I've got a subscription with Netflix and Hulu as well, but this is more catered towards our thought process. I've been watching them from day one, and it's excellent material.
Yeah.
So
and so back to the show. I'll break the fourth wall a little bit. I don't know if you can tell from my voice, but I'm not in the studio right now. And I came in the studio earlier this week and recorded that interview. And so the segments kind of got mixed up. So apologies. I don't know, David, if you addressed that when we came back from the break and I just didn't hear it.
No.
Apologies if that interview kind of got disjointed. It played part one, part three, part two. So, but the whole interview was there. And David wasn't in the studio when I recorded that interview. So, David, you told me that you had some thoughts about it. So what were you thinking about that interview?
Well, I cut up the audio and mixed it and overlaid the video. So the stream on the radio, it got jacked up, but on our live stream, it actually played in sequence. So that was good. But, I had the opportunity to to listen to it and watch it numerous times over the past week, and it was just so exciting. It was the best interview that I've seen in quite some time. Not just because of who it was and what they were talking about, but because it plays so much into our everyday thought process of what we preach when we go out organizing. And just the main tenet of unionism is solidarity, and I mean, for us, it's kind of like you said in the interview, for any union organizer worth their salt, they already know this, but it is nice to see a peer-reviewed research paper that has actually points that out, that you can point to and say, not only are we saying this, but we've got this information to back it up.
Yeah.
And
I think the work that Jake and Paul, Jake, like I said, he's from the University of Washington. Paul Freimer is from Princeton. And I think this is some really valuable work that will show folks, like empirically, what you and I and any other union organizer worth their salt, we already know this. We see this from experience, right? But this is really good for kind of the skeptical, maybe liberal. There are a lot of liberal, progressive type folks that are really skeptical of unions, that think that they think that unions are like racist. And there have been unions that were racist in the past, and there are unions today still, no doubt, that have some amount of systemic racism. But like what we can see with this paper is that clearly the broad trend in contemporary America since the civil rights era is that unions are really close to, if not the center of the struggle against racism in the United States. And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, well, even long before the civil rights era, and that's something that don't get talked about a lot. But this past week, I don't know, you may have seen it before, but it was a documentary on Alabama Public Television you can watch online. And I was doing some research on the Battle of Blair Mountain, and I came across this documentary called Mine Wars. And the whole documentary was centered. They had several current day mine worker historians that they were interviewing, but they kind of framed it as kind of a movie, so you got to see some actors in there as well. But the documentary centered around mine workers in South Virginia during that time, where the owners of the company or the owners of the mine was separating workers by white folks, the national white folks that were already here, black folks that were already here, of course, but a lot of them had come from the deep South. And then Eastern Europeans that have been brought in. And it really, it showed that solidarity where those workers came together and overcome that. So it's not just that just happened since
David, we're coming up on the break. We're coming up on the break now. This is the Valley Labor Report. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story, and this is News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM WVNN. News starts now.
Hurricane Isaias is pounding the Bahamas at this hour and will head toward the east coast of Florida later today. Meteorologist Allison Chinchar says parts of the state are already feeling the effects of the storm.
The real concern going forward is how close does it truly get to the Florida coastline? We're already starting to see some of those outer bands from Hurricane Isaias push into Cuba and Florida. Sustained winds are still about 85 miles per hour, but it is expected to slow a little bit as it does approach Florida.
70 million people are in the path of the hurricane from Florida all the way up to Maine. Republicans and Democrats are negotiating today in Washington on a huge COVID relief bill. The talks are focused on restoring the now expired $600 a week supplemental unemployment benefit. Mexico said to now be behind only the United States and Brazil in the number of COVID-19 deaths. More than 153,000 people have died from it in the U.S. I'm Christopher Cruz.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms. People across Alabama are hurting. Elected leaders have bailed out corporations while sending only a one-time cash payment to working families despite record unemployment and a public health crisis. Hometown Action is fighting for working people across Alabama to build inclusive and sustainable small town and rural communities. Hometown Action demands that Congress pass a people's bailout that expands health care, sends cash payments to families, and invests in green jobs to restart the economy. Now is the time to act. Learn more at www.hometownaction.org. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
All workers deserve fair wages, affordable health care, and a retirement plan that enables them to retire with dignity. All workers deserve to have a say about the terms and conditions of their employment, not just the bosses. With the machinist union's over 600,000 members having our back, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama has been serving workers' interests for over 20 years. Our members have the best health insurance in the area with zero deductible plans. We set the bar for pay in the area with over $40 an hour rates, consistently averaging the highest non-college degree jobs in North Alabama with some of the best retirement plans in the industry. We can do the same for you. Together, we remain united, raising our voices to ensure justice on the job and service in the community. The Machinist Union is a true Southern union founded in Atlanta in 1888. We have been serving members' needs for 132 years. The longevity of our union proves our dedication and loyalty to the working class. The Machinist Union isn't just for machinists. We represent workers in government, healthcare, auto workers, aerospace workers, transportation workers, the defense industry, and woodworking. Our members even build the iconic Harley-Davidson motorcycles. If you're ready to get serious about better benefits and wages, if you want to have a voice in your workplace with over 600,000 members to back you up, call or email us today at 256-286-3704 or organize at IAMAW44.org.
The Dale Jackson Show, a safe space for terrible people. Weekdays, 7 to 11 a.m., only on WVNN. WVNN.
Whoop, whoop.
All right, Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is David Story. On the phone with us is your co-host, Jacob Morrison. Jacob, you still with me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So kind of to finish up where we had left off, we were talking about the interview that you had done, and I was discussing the mine wars that's on Alabama Public Television and how the mine owners had separated everyone up by race and then, of course, by nationality with the Eastern Europeans, and it was their thoughts that if they could keep everybody, because in the north as far as like Pennsylvania and areas like that, the labor union was strong, the mine workers union was strong up there, and they thought if they could keep the workers separated in different housing and areas like that, that they could overcome that solidarity and building the union. And what they failed to recognize was, and what one of the mine workers historians pointed out in the documentary was, in the mine where there's no light and everybody's covered in coal dust, you can't tell what race anybody is. And you're down there for 12 hours a day working with nobody to talk to. So they started these conversations down in the mines and then not realizing when they come up, oh, this guy's a black guy or this guy's a white guy. But eventually they came together after a few years and it worked out really well. But it's an excellent documentary if you hadn't seen it.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. And you know, like you said, there has been a strong tradition in the labor movement of anti-racism, and for a long time in the history of the labor movement, that tradition was competing with a racist tradition. And I think that broadly, by the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the anti-racist tradition was beginning to win out, and by the 60s and 70s, I think it pretty clearly is the dominant force. But like you said, like you alluded to, so from the very early stages of the labor movement, there's been a very strong anti-racist tradition.
Yeah, and
that is important to recognize.
Yep, exactly, and it speaks to not only what bosses or owners have been doing for the past several hundred years, or probably longer than that we don't have recorded in history, but it speaks to what's going on today. And something else that we should touch on is the fact that for years, as I grew up, you know, we had Democrats and we had Republicans, not so much libertarians in you know, back before the last 15, 20 years, but the notion was you elected, you know, the person that you thought would do the best job for whatever you know your thoughts were. And in the past, seems like 10 to 15 years, certainly more in the past 4 to 5 years, we've seen this ideology coming from not only the bosses, but now politicians that want to keep their power or keep empowered or get elected with this divide and conquer mentality. And, you know, we talked about it a little bit earlier about Tommy Tuberville. I'm driving home yesterday and listening to an interview on this station with Tuberville. And he's talking about the communist Democrats, the socialist Democrats, you know, and how they're ruining America. And if we don't get these communists out of office, that we just don't know what America's going to be like in the next couple of years. I'm thinking.
I want to interject, like, just really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Man, I wish Democrats were as radical as Republicans think they are. Like, I would love to have me some socialist Democrats.
Is it insane or what? I mean, and so
lunacy.
And so I'm sitting there listening to him, and you know as well, you know, you'll vouch for me. I am not a Republican by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact was I was willing to support Senator Sessions before this runoff, just for the simple fact that he is a politician and he knows what it's going to take to help Alabama keep jobs, to bring jobs here, unlike Tommy Tuberville. But as he's talking about these communist Democrats, you know, just this past year, Doug Jones let's see right here. Quorum Analytics has released a new report ranking Senator Doug Jones as among the most bipartisan members of the United States Senate. The report analyzed the bipartisan actions taken by members of Congress so far in the 116th Congress, and Jones has co-sponsored this year 47% are led by a Republican. You know, and it's like, wow, it's the same, but it's the exact same talking points over and over again. The only way that he can defeat someone is by dividing and lying, flat out lying about the policies that someone else is making. And I haven't been a Doug Jones fan by any stretch of the imagination. But let's be honest here. He's not a communist.
Right. Yeah, if Doug Jones is a socialist, if Doug Jones is a communist, what in the heck does a centrist look like? What does a centrist look like? What does a liberal look like? What does a moderate look like? If Doug Jones is a socialist, I mean, it's lunacy. These people are mad.
No, they're not mad. They're doing exactly what they've been doing. They're doing exactly what they've learned from the bosses over these years. Divide and conquer.
Right.
You know, and not only is he attacking Doug Jones, he's coming out and attacking the teachers union as well yesterday, talking about the teachers need to not worry about the coronavirus. We've got to get back into school and all. I have not heard him lay out one policy plan. He said nothing about what are we going to do to keep the teachers safe whenever we force them back to school. It was these teachers unions are just pushing back and we can't have this. Okay, well then what is your policy?
Right.
What are you going to do to protect them? Mr. Tuberville? I mean, it makes me sick. It makes me sick. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, are they?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, like, are they supposed to just do it just like normal, like no precautions at all? I mean, if we really, and I think, you know, there's a reasonable conversation about opening schools, because I think it is vitally important for children, especially young children, to be able to socialize, to be able to learn. And we have, as a society, placed so much value on being able to go out to eat or being able to go out to the bar, and we have not allocated nearly enough risk in the national conversation to schooling, I think. But if we're gonna do schooling, it can't be like normal. We can't be having 35, 40 kids in a classroom that's 300 square feet or 400 square feet. I mean, we've got to be radically downsizing classroom sizes, and we have a teacher shortage as it is. No one wants to be a teacher because the pay is not enough, the benefits are not enough, and you have to deal with all these crazy parents, you have to deal with all these crazy kids, and you have to deal with politicians like Tuberville. You have to deal with the bosses constantly dogging on you in the public. You've got to deal with you've got to deal with the government on your back telling you how to teach all the time, not being able to teach how you know.
Yeah.
Changing it constantly having to change your lesson plans. It's crazy. I mean, I can't imagine the stress that teachers are having to go through right now. And politicians, bosses, are just throwing them under the bus. They're trying to divide the rest of us against teachers. And for what? So they can get elected. So they can destroy teachers' unions. So they can destroy worker power, one of the strongest bases of worker power in America right now. And so that they can privatize schools, so that they can send more money to themselves and their billionaire donors. It's sickening.
Yep. And what we see in Tuberville is exactly what we, not Democrats, not Republicans, not independents, all of us should be worried about. Is this divide, instead of coming out with a policy that he may have talked with Jones about, or he may have talked to with Senator Shelby about, we've got him just sitting here making inflammatory comments, attacking everybody, because this is what people buy into these days. They love this reality show politics to where we just tear everybody down and we don't accomplish anything. I mean,
yeah.
and like you said, the privatization, to speak of the privatization, we've got Trump constantly attacking the U.S. Postal Service over the past, basically since he's come into office, but certainly over the past year. We've got this new appointee in May, Louis, whatever his name is, Louis
DeJoy.
Yeah, there you go, Louis DeJoy. So I done a little bit of research because I knew you weren't going to be on here, so I was going to have to actually, I guess, do my job for once. I apologize. But so I done a little bit of research, and would you believe that that they have ranked, they went out and done a poll of all American, of a large swath of Americans. Who do you think ranked the number one most favorable business in America? I mean, I would have thought Amazon, to be completely honest with you. Amazon came in second. Google came in third. The U.S. Postal Service is the most loved business in America. And we're doing everything we can to destroy it, to privatize it. And when we talk about privatizing, we need to talk about costs. Because right now, I looked at the costs of what the average postal worker in America makes. It's $18.35 an hour for a rural carrier. For a mail carrier in the city, the average is $17.48 an hour. Now compare that to FedEx, who, is one of their main customers. I'm going to assume if we privatize USPS that we've got to have somebody to come in and do it, pick up some of that load. Their average pay is $19 an hour. So it's not that much more. But you know what it costs to mail a letter with FedEx? $9.05. You know what it costs for us to mail a letter? 55 cents with the USPS. Folks, we'll be right back. We got one more segment. We appreciate you listening in.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air. People across Alabama are hurting. Elected leaders have bailed out corporations while sending only a one-time cash payment to working families despite record unemployment and a public health crisis. Hometown Action is fighting for working people across Alabama to build inclusive and sustainable small town and rural communities. Hometown Action demands that Congress pass a people's bailout that expands health care, sends cash payments to families, and invests in green jobs to restart the economy. Now is the time to act. Learn more at www.hometownaction.org. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE Local 1858, believes all workers are entitled to fairness, dignity, and respect. AFGE also knows that the best way to guarantee proper treatment is for workers to stand together, united, looking out for each other. In AFGE, we fight for workers every day to ensure a workplace that is safe and free from harassment. If you're a federal employee and want to be a part of this union, to protect yourself and your fellow workers, call 256-876-4880. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
WVNN.
Good morning and welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is David Story. We have Jacob Morrison on the phone calling in. He's out on a mission from God today. And have you ran into any of those Illinois Nazis yet, Jacob?
Have I ran into any who?
Illinois Nazis.
I have not.
It's a very old, anybody my age would get that, and they're probably out there laughing in their car right now. But my daughters get it because I forced them to watch the movie. So before we went into the commercial break, we were talking about the privatization of the U.S. Postal Service and how Trump and all of his cronies are wanting to privatize that. And we were talking about the average wages of the workers. The average wage of the mail carrier, roughly $18 an hour. The average carrier of FedEx, roughly $19 an hour. A little bit more, but $1 an hour don't make up for 55 cents to mail a letter compared to almost $10 to mail a letter. So where does all that extra money go? CEO of FedEx, Fred Smith, made $15.96 million in total compensation last year. CIO Rob Carter made $5.96 million. CFO Alan Graff made $5.34 million. I mean, so you can see where the money goes, and you can see why they want to privatize it. It has nothing to do with the cost to the taxpayers. It has to do with shifting that profit from and regardless of what anybody says, I've done the research. The U.S. Postal Service does not take federal taxes. They are completely self-sustained. So what they're going to do is shift that profit over to a company like FedEx or one of the others that may upstart and get a lot of people rich, and we're going to pay for it. We're going to go from paying 55 cents to $10 to mail a letter.
Yeah, and the thing that – so you mentioned Louis DeJoy, and you didn't mention how he got appointed to Postmaster General. He's a Trump donor. He has no experience in Postal Service, no experience even in FedEx or any of these other postal carrier companies, these private companies. He is just some bigwig Trump donor who was one of the biggest Trump donors in 2016, and now he's got this big cabinet position. That's his only qualification for this job. And when people talk about when conservative free market fundamentalist types, when they talk about privatization, they tell you it's to bring down costs, to allow innovation, to allow competition, which makes the cost go down, the quality of the services go up. But that's not really their goal. If that was their goal, here's what they would do. They would allow the Postal Service to innovate. They would allow the Postal Service to do the things that they need to do. Instead, what they have done to the Postal Service and what they're trying to do to the Postal Service is put it in a straitjacket so that it can't make money. For decades, it was completely self-sustaining on inflation adjusted about 50 cents per letter. It was completely self-sustaining until in 2006, they passed a law that made them fund health care and retirement for people so far in advance.
75 years in advance.
75 years in advance. Like, they have got to pay for the retirement of workers who are not even born yet.
Yep.
No other private company has to do this. No other government agency has to do this. The U.S. Postal Service has to do that. Additionally, the U.S. Postal Service is contractually, by law, not allowed to branch off into other services. They are not allowed to do banking like they did in the 60s. They are not allowed to do any other thing that would generate revenue for the Postal Service besides carrying packages. If you want things to be able to innovate, then allow this thing to innovate. They don't want that. And then this Louis DeJoy, he has been putting more and more and more onerous regulations.
Yep.
They say that they hate regulations. He's been putting more and more and more regulations on postal workers that make it harder for them to do their job. He is eliminating overtime. He is making it to where they can't sort letters in the morning, and that's going to delay.
What they're trying to do is make it to where the American public thinks that the U.S. Postal Service aren't doing their job, when the fact of the matter is what they're doing is tying their hands.
That's exactly right. They're trying to because, like you said, the Postal Service is the #1 rated entity in America. What they have to, and so they can't privatize it right now because everybody's like, oh, well, it works so well. Why would we want to change it? What they have to do is they have to make the service terrible so that they can privatize it. They have to make the service bad so that people look at it and they say, oh, this corporate this government bureaucracy, government doesn't work. They have to make government not work so that they can hand it over to these private money blood-sucking corporations so that they can bring down workers' compensation packages and put more money in the hands of billionaire and millionaire owners. You mentioned that the hourly wage for FedEx is $1 an hour more. I would be willing to bet money. I would be willing to bet a significant amount of money that the entire compensation package for U.S. postal workers is higher when you count their retirement, their health care, their benefits, and everything like that. Because probably the FedEx folks, that is like basically all they get is their hourly wage. So what they want to do is they want to move money from the workers' wages. They want to make people pay more for the product so they can put more money in the oligarchs' pockets. That is the grift. Folks, you got to realize they don't care about you. They don't care about the efficiency of services. They don't care about making things less costly for you. They want to put more money in their pockets.
And once it's gone, it's gone. You can guarantee that once they've destroyed it, there's never any coming back. I mean, I don't use a whole lot of mail. Not a lot of us use a whole lot of mail today. But when I have to mail a bill away to somebody, far away, it's 55 cents. Do you really want to be tied to FedEx and have to drive up there and pay $10, $20 to mail a small package to your family across the other side of the country? I mean, it's insanity. Jacob, we got about 20 seconds, brother. Take us out.
Folks, save the Postal Service. Look up online, see what you can do. There are petitions that you can sign, and they're trying this with the TVA too, folks. Go back and watch our interview with Gay Henson, the Valley-wide president of the TVA Engineering Association, and Paul Sheeran, their international president. Go back and watch that interview. We've got in the description a link to a petition that you can sign to try to save the TVA, save the Postal Service. Folks, these workers are like angels, okay? We have got to do everything that we can to save the Postal Service, save the TVA, because once it's turned over to private hands, it's not going to be good. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been the Valley Labor Report, and we will see you next week.
WVNN